Welcome to the Crawford Family Forum. I'm Pat Morrison here at KPCC for Props and Pints. Thank you for being here. My guests, you will have heard me interview them on my program time and again because they're so good and so smart. It is, as you see up there, Bob Stern, who is the former president of the Center for Governmental Studies. Just because he's former doesn't mean he's forgotten anything. I think his knowledge has only increased. And Sherry Bevich-Jeffy, whom you read often in print, and she is a professor at USC's Saul Price School of Public Policy. Please thank them both for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob.
You know, being an American citizen does not demand very much of you. You may have to go on jury duty. You may have to go into the military if the draft is ever restored in a dire situation. But for the most part, your participation is voluntary, which is why voting is all the more important, and informed voting in particular, especially the state of California, where you could take a sleeping bag into the polling place sometimes. It seems like the ballot is so long that you have to sit there and thumb through it over and over again. So we're going to do your homework for the audience listening at home and for you here to go through your ballot package as you see it and talk about some of these propositions and these measures that will be confronting you when you go into the voting booth with or without your sleeping bag on Tuesday. So thank you very much. First of them is the California water bond. We are in an epic drought. It hasn't been this dry at least since the Civil War, and maybe as long ago as the 16th century, when the tree rings tell the tale and Sir Francis Drake put in the coast and up the coast and probably left because he was thirsty. So the water bond, Proposition 1, formerly known as Proposition 43, it got promoted to the head of the ballot for reasons I'm sure we'll find out, which would authorize about $7.5 billion altogether in spending for state water infrastructure, including water quality issues, water storage issues, habitat restoration, a lot of money floating around, including money to restore some of the waterways up in the Sacramento area, which date back, the levees date back to the gold rush. Imagine we've got 150-year-old water systems supplying this. 80% of the water in California goes to agriculture, 20% to the cities, and when it's in the cities, about half of that water is used outside your houses for watering plants, shrubbery, and the like. So this is a bond measure to be paid off over the course of 40 years by you, of course, the taxpayers, and let's find out what else it would do. So Bob, do you want to start us off on this and how different this is in terms?
Are we going to have a tape on that?
Oh, we do. I'm so sorry. We do have a tape on that. Let's see what Bob's students, Bob Stern and the students at the Rose Institute of State and Local Government at Claremont McKenna, putting forward some of the basics about Proposition 1.
Hi there. I'm Tyler Finn, a sophomore at Claremont McKenna College. On November 4th, California voters will decide whether or not to approve Proposition 1. Proposition 1 is a legislatively referred bond act that would enact the Water Quality, Supply, and Infrastructure Improvement Act of 2014. Of note, because the measure was passed in the last few days of the legislative session, all information about it, including arguments for and against, will be included in a supplemental ballot pamphlet and not in the main ballot pamphlet. Proposition 1 would authorize $7.12 billion in general obligation bonds for state water supply infrastructure projects. Government bonds are essentially loans from the public to the state to be paid back over a set period of time with interest. If Proposition 1 is approved by the voters, California will sell $7.12 billion worth of bonds to be paid back over the next 40 years. Total cost of repayment of the bonds will total about $14.4 billion. It is important to note that much of the bond requires matching funds from local agencies in order to be implemented. Proposition 1 bond funds will be used for statewide water system operational improvement and drought preparedness, watershed protection and restoration, groundwater sustainability projects, and flood management projects, among other uses. Notably, no funds are allocated to build a canal or a tunnel to move water around the Sacramento River Delta.
All right,
Okay.
There's your student.
Yes, my students did a terrific job.
and they did each of the propositions. We're only going to show a couple of them. The interesting thing about this bond measure is, number one, it was done very late in the legislative session, and that's why you got a supplemental
This
ballot.
iteration was done, remember, there was some thought, there was an $11.1 billion bond issue that was held back. I think both the governor and the Republicans weren't real happy with the amount, and the Republicans weren't happy with the distribution. So, I mean, I'm not going to defend the fact that they snuck through the back door, but they didn't.
The interesting thing is that apparently Jerry Brown had to be dragged kicking and screaming into this. He didn't want any bond measure on the ballot. He didn't want the $11 billion measure on the ballot. He didn't want this. But people said, we're in the middle of a drought, and we need to put something on the ballot. And he said, okay. The other interesting thing I thought was there are only 2 no votes in the legislature against this. One was a Democrat and one was a Republican. Now, as Sherry knows and Pat knows, most of you know, to get almost a unanimous vote in the legislature is amazing. It's very unusual, very rare. And on Prop 2, by the way, it was unanimous vote.
Mm-hmm.
So the legislature really came behind, and as did the environmentalists and as did the farmers. The thing you have to remember, though, is it's a cost $14 billion over the 40-year period.
Double
the amount.
Now, the question, I'm sorry.
And we have approved $8 billion in water bonds since 2002.
The question is, does it address the concerns of the drought and the underlying causes for it, except for making
Not
it
the
rain?
immediate concerns, no. But this is easier for legislators, because if we were to address the immediate concerns of the drought, it would cost a lot of money right away. And these guys don't want to spend a lot of money right away. But by looking as though they are addressing long-term water needs, they get the political gain. And because of term limits, although we'll have to see whether the 12-year term limit makes a difference, whoever follows them to Sacramento gets the economic pain. I have to believe that some of this came about because people are hesitant to deal immediately with crises, which is something relatively new, but are willing to pass the buck in terms of money down the road and look like they are dealing with a crisis.
It takes a long time to sell the bonds. It takes a long time to build the dams.
Right.
It takes a long time to fix the levees. So for immediate drought, this will have no impact. For future drought, it will.
One thing this also put off is the ongoing, let's say, 100-year plus conflict between Northern and Southern California. That Northern
Right.
California always accuses Southern California of, quote unquote, stealing our water. And that's why you heard the student talking about no tunnels, no sort of aqueducts, no big California tunnel that's going to be like a soda straw that we stick in Northern California and steal its water, which it's always so afraid of.
And that was an explicit part of the legislative deal.
Exactly.
That and a couple of $2 billion for dams, although you don't see the word dam. D-A-M, by the way. That the Republicans demanded that.
And also, you don't really see much specifics in this. It's really going to be up to a board later on to decide where the money goes. The other important thing to remember is, I think much of this bond money may not be spent because it takes local matching funds.
Correct.
And the question is, will the local people put up the money?
There's already, $4 billion in unspent bonds that are going to be folded into this. That's why it gets to be as high as it is, quite frankly. And if this doesn't pass, that money remains unspent, but there.
I think it's $400 million.
One of the political consequences of a bill that appropriates money but doesn't necessarily spend it all is when they come back to you and say, well, we want another measure. You say, well, what did you do with the money we voted for? Well, we didn't use it all yet. Well, why don't you use it up? That's why there's money left over from other bond issues that's going into this one.
One more point is, I had a question last week about this. Why are we voting on this? Well,
We
the
have
reason
to.
we're voting on this is any bond measure must be approved by the voters. So the legislature can't approve a bond measure without your approval.
And one last point, because we are in the midst of a drought, I think that probably means that Prop 1 is going to have a fairly easy time being passed. It's interesting. People now are really beginning to focus on the drought and what it might mean.
Well, and the other reason is there's no money being spent against it. So
Yeah, there's nothing
That's a
about
good
against
point.
it. But there's one point that is provided for in here, which the county of Los Angeles has wanted for a long time. The aquifer
Right.
up around the Santa Susana Pass and in the northwest part of the county, it's a terrifically rich aquifer, but it's been polluted by a lot of aerospace chemicals that have been going into it for 50, 60 years, since the beginning of the Cold War. And so there's money, I think $750 million, that's provided to clean that up. And by cleaning that up, making that water potable and available in Southern California would help to localize water sources, meaning we wouldn't have to get it from that much water from the Sierra Nevada or from Northern California.
There's one more point I want to make. There's really good news this year. You only have 6 measures to deal with. I mean, in 1990, if you were
True.
here, we would be here for 3 hours. In 1990, there were 28 measures on the ballot in November, and in June, there were 17 others for a total of 45 that year. So be happy this year. You know, do your homework, but only 6 measures.
They have to invent a ballot version of speed dating, I guess. All right, so let's go to, first of all, we have our Q&A. Any questions from the audience? Yes, on the aisle. Wait till we get the microphone to you, please. Janice, here they come.
Yes, to Professor Jeffy, you referred to the politicians not wanting to address the immediate drought issue. I've got my own ideas about how they might do that, but I'd like to know how you think that the legislature could spend money this year and next year to address the drought.
Well, obviously, next year may be a better time to do it because it's an off-election year. What should they do? Is that what you're asking me? Listen, money can't buy rain, and that's the bottom line problem. But I will also say it's not as though this drought came out of nowhere. We have known for a long time. In fact, the last semi-severe drought happened during the first term of, and I do mean the first term of Governor Jerry Brown. But I think one of the things that term limits have done is to not focus legislators on anything more than what will get them elected the next time around or might prevent them from getting elected the next time around. And spending money that they have to be accountable for while they're still in office is not one of those things.
There's another question here. Could you stand up and Janice can come to you and tell us your first name and where you're from?
I'm Claire, I'm from Altadena. I wonder, you said that if there's not matching funds for the bond money, it will still sit there. Is there some penalty against paying it back early and paying less interest?
Well, it won't be sold. So actually, we won't be paying interest on it. It just sits there unsold.
I mean, and sometime in the future, someone may decide to put another bond issue using that bond money on the ballot, but we just don't know. But the question, if you follow up from the gentleman's question is, why in the world would you have any money sitting there when we do need to pay immediate and long-term attention to the water crisis in this state?
Any other questions on this one? Couple more? Janice, here and here. Or we'll just do one more, I guess.
Sally Kilby, City of South Pasadena. And I was wondering, this measure kind of sounds like sausage being made, and it's
Welcome to
it's
the
on there.
legislative process.
So bottom line, what is your recommendation?
We don't do that. We don't do that.
We don't do that.
That's why you're here, to listen to all of this and make up your own mind. So now we get
vote.
Yes, vote is a good recommendation. The quiz, we have a lovely gift for the person who can answer this. Remember, do not shout it out. Raise your hand. Janice is watching for the first person to raise a hand. Who was the governor who got direct democracy, including the initiative, referendum, and recall, approved by voters? If you know the answer, raise your hand. Janice will go to the first person.
Oops.
It was Hiram Johnson.
Hiram Johnson is correct.
The first California governor.
California women had the vote before before women nationally had the vote. This was the case in a number of western states. In part, it's in the case of Wyoming because they wanted women to come west and to help settle these territories. And so offering them the vote and property rights was one way of enticing them. And I think that was part of the 1911
Right.
initiative, the ballot changes as well. Okay, all right, let's move on to the next ballot measure, which is Proposition 2. Isn't that funny? This time 2 follows 1. Doesn't always happen. Hey, it doesn't always happen on these ballots, so.
Well, the legislature several years ago said we don't want to go back to 1 every 2 years because people will get confused. And so that's why you're seeing 45,
Right.
46, 47. And the legislature this year said, well, we really like 1 and 2. We really like these, so we're going to make these ahead of everybody
Well,
else and make them 1 and 2.
There is also the tradition, if it's not the law, and I'm not sure about this, that bond issues are at the top of the ballot no matter what the number. Then the legislative legislation that goes on the ballot, the legislature puts stuff on the ballot, that's number 2. And then come the initiative and then the
And the
referenda.
reason for that is they think that you get very tired of voting yes on these things. And so by the time you get to the bottom, you'll be voting no. So they don't want the legislative measures at the bottom where you're voting no.
Or not vote at all. There are studies that have been done that just show from the top of the ballot down, it goes.
But not on propositions. I mean, Prop
Yeah.
13, for example.
Prop 13 was an exception.
Prop 13 in 1978 for you young people.
could have been elected governor.
But there were more votes cast yes and no on Prop 13 than were cast for governor.
People went in just to vote on that. And I've always thought that, like a really great UCLA basketball player, they should retire the number of certain well-known props, like Prop 13, so there's never another Prop 13.
Prop
It's only more
13,
confusing.
they have actually debated that. I mean, not,
There have been Prop 13 since. but
I know that, but there are people who really do believe that 13
Retire the
ought to be
number.
retired.
All right. So we have Proposition 2, not yet notorious, which is a legislative constitutional amendment. It's a budget stabilization account that would take 1.5% of general fund revenues to, it's a rainy day fund. This is what Jerry Brown has been talking about for a long time. And the question is, first of all, the larger question, is this percentage a good way to fund issues on the ballot? Whether these are noble issues or not, is taking a percentage a good idea? Prop 98 did the same thing, a constitutional amendment about funding schools. But this sort of autopilot budgeting is what people are concerned about. The question for you two, how much flexibility is there in this rainy day fund, the budget stabilization account?
I have to tell you, Bob and I discussed this in some depth while we were waiting out there, and full disclosure, we are both confused. This is an example, to some extent, of ballot box budgeting, as Pat intimated, and I have some concern with that because right now, what is it, something like 12% of the budget is actually flexible enough to move here and there. Everything else has sort of been tied down. This is a higher percentage in toto than the rainy day fund that we have now. It's not a new idea. It simply extends it and throws in this local reserve for schools and local governments, which neither Bob nor I can figure out how you deal with that and who decides how much money goes to each. That's not an answer to your question, Pat, because I don't have one. Maybe Bob
Well, there are
does, and he
three
lied
things-
to me out there.
There are three things to this proposition as I understand it. Number one, it's going to take money, a certain percentage of money, 0.75% of the general fund revenues to pay down debt. California has $300 billion of debt right now. Now, it's pension, it's bonds, it's health care for retirees, and it's money we owe local districts. So it takes the money, and that's about $800 million a year to pay that down. The second part of it is it establishes a rainy day fund, because the problem that we've had, and many states have adopted this problem we have, is in boom time, we receive lots and lots of money, and it's a lot of times we spend that money. In bust times, we owe the schools lots of money and we have lots of problems. So this takes another $800 million and puts it aside until there's about $11 billion in the rainy day fund.
Which is more than we have now.
Right.
But we do have a
Our
fund.
budget's about $110 billion, just to give you an idea. It's about 10% of the budget. And then the third thing it does, and this is the complicated one that I'm not quite sure, it establishes a reserve fund for schools, but caps the amount that schools can can retain in reserves.
Right.
And so what we're seeing is some of the wealthy school districts who have huge reserves opposing this because they say you're going to reduce our reserves and we don't want to do that. The reason they did that, as I understand it, is the labor unions, teachers union, are very upset with all these reserves. They want to get paid more in salary and they don't want the school districts to be holding on to the money. So those are the three parts to that. Again, this passed unanimously in the legislature. Unbelievably, it's a unanimous, most conservative of the legislators and the most liberal of the legislators voted for it. And there is no moneyed opposition against it. The only opposition in your ballot pamphlet is these wealthy school districts.
The magic words for the conservatives were, we could pay off our debt faster.
Yeah.
And that's what really got them on
One of the
board.
reasons that you would see the stories in the paper every year, the California budget was such a roller coaster, is because it's so dependent
Watch
on
the ads.
income tax. As property taxes have been kind of locked up by Prop 13, and the property tax burden has shifted from businesses to homeowners, what you see is these wild variables in the income tax. So,
And
the
sales
California budgeters would be watching Wall Street to see whether there were big bonuses coming to some of the big banking guys, because if they lived in California, that bonus would become part of the California budget because income tax would take a
Well,
portion
it's
of it.
actually
So-
Silicon Valley.
Oh, Silicon Valley, I beg
That's
your
the
pardon.
way,
yeah.
it's Facebook and all these
Right.
people who are making huge amounts of money, capital gains tax and so forth. So it really takes that into account. And we really do have boom and bust with Silicon Valley and also with real estate and so forth.
Yeah.
So anyway, this proposition is basically to cut down the debt, to have a rainy day fund, and to reduce the surpluses that school districts have.
Any questions about this one? See, they're all just as confused as we are.
Good.
I understand that.
There is one. Do we find one? Going once? Okay,
There's
on
one.
the aisle.
Brave person.
Stand up, please. Tell us your name and where you're from.
And why we should let you live.
Jeff from Silver Lake, how much is your understanding of what the rich school districts would actually have to change if 2 passes?
Well, it has to bring it down to 10% of the reserves, as I understand it, and they have more than 10%.
All right. Our quiz for this one, again, don't shout it out, raise your hand. Thanks to California's curious voting history, which is saying the least, what candidate won both the Republican and the Democratic primaries for governor in the same year?
That's
This
an
is my
easy
question.
one.
I think we stumped them. Wait, did I see a hand over here? Raise that hand. Okay. Stand up, please. We'll bring the microphone to you. Who are you?
Bob in Pasadena. Would that be Earl Warren?
In what year?
Probably I'll say 48.
It was 46, but let's give it to him anyway.
Yeah.
Yay! This was a cross-filing system that allowed people to, to be running. Is that right? In
Yeah,
each
you
party.
could run in the Democratic primary and the Republican
and he
primary.
won
and
enough
you did
votes
not
in the primary.
identify, at that point, you did not identify your party.
Right. And he became both the Republican and the Democratic candidate in the primary, and of course won in the general. This is the one where legend has it, the same election where Richard Nixon ran for Congress the first time, that he would set, because of this same filing thing, that he was also on the Democratic side, so he would send out mailers addressed to dear fellow Democrats.
Yeah.
There is a bounty out to anybody who finds one of those mailers, so we'll be on the lookout. All right, now let's move on to Proposition 45. Healthcare insurance rate changes. I know, the basics of this, well, let's see, no, we don't have a video on this one. This has to do with the California Insurance Commissioner, among other things. In some states, the insurance commissioner has the right to set rates and to veto increases. That's not the case in California. In California, you can describe the insurance commissioner's job the way you would the Queen of England's job, to advise, to warn, and be consulted. This would put more teeth in the insurance commissioner's job in fact, able to veto some of the increases in rates and demand hearings and justifications for those increases. So you want to take it away?
Well, this was supposed to be on the 2012 ballot. Really interesting. They circulated it to be on the ballot, and the counties didn't count enough signatures. This is an initiative, of course. The counties didn't count enough signatures, so it's now the 2014 ballot, although it was written for 2012.
And why would it have been better for the proponents if it had been on
Presidential
2012?
turnout.
Well, the turnout.
It's a more democratic electorate.
Plus,
big
Obamacare,
D.
plus Obamacare wasn't in effect at that point, and
Right.
so people were concerned about it. The other interesting thing is the people who sponsored this, Consumer Watchdog, are the same people who sponsored Prop 103 back in 1988, which established the insurance commissioner as elected, but also, more importantly, gave the insurance commissioner the right to review your auto and homeowner rates. And since then, the insurance commissioner has saved California $2 billion in reducing auto and homeowners rates. So the proponents would say, if you like what happened with your auto and homeowners insurance, vote yes, because your health insurance will go down. However, it only applies to 15% of you. It doesn't apply to everybody. Most of us get our insurance through big employers. This applies only to 15% people who have small employers or individual health insurance, and allows the insurance commissioner to reject rates by the insurance companies. And guess who's against this? They've spent $55 million against this, and that's why you're seeing all the ads against it. The other fascinating part to me was, in 1988, the insurance companies also spent lots of money against Prop 103, but at the time, the Federal Communication Commission said, for every 4 ads that you run against the proposition, the television and radio stations have to give 1 ad for the yes side. So you got 25% of the ads on the other side. This year, you're not seeing any ads at all on the yes side.
And there was another factor involved in the 1988 campaign. The insurance companies were so frightened by what they thought might happen is that they made counter initiatives. However, they put 4 of them on the ballot, outspent the 103 campaign. I think it was 10-1. Ralph Nader endorsed 103 at the height of Ralph Nader's relevancy.
Before the butterfly ballot.
You betcha.
Yes.
Before 2000.
In the year 2000, yes.
And when in doubt, people tend to vote no. So they had these 4 little insurance, I'm better, do this, do that. And they had 103 with 1 message, 1 spokesperson, 1 symbol, if you will, Ralph Nader, and that helped immensely. Yeah. That's not the case here.
One of the flies in the ointment, as some people have suggested, is how this is going to mesh with Obamacare.
Oh, yes.
And the logistics of having, the Covered California program work within the new framework of the new powers for an an elected insurance commissioner, by the way.
Consumer Watchdog says that the rates that are negotiated by Healthy California, Covered California, are actually negotiated in secret, and nobody has an opportunity to see, to have the insurance companies justify them. This would be done more in public. The insurance commissioner could reject them or accept them, but the insurance commissioner would be on the consumer's side, is their argument.
Well, it depends on who gets elected, doesn't it?
But he can't raise the rates. He can only reduce the rates, And the interesting thing, under Prop 103, we had Republican insurance commissioners like Chuck Quackenbush, who also required the insurance companies to lower their rates, because the insurance commissioners realize that they're an elected official and they know that the voters are watching them.
And they may want to run for governor.
Yeah.
If you look at the funding issues here, you find that more than $40 million has been put in by insurance companies against this, and then a lot of law firms putting in money of their own. Law firms and nursing associations are in favor of this particular issue. So, any questions about Proposition 45? Yes. Can you stand up? We'll bring you a mic.
Here it comes. And by the way, interestingly, the Democratic
it's here, Janice. So
Party
you want to get
said
your
yes.
guy up here? Just a minute, please, Sherry. Okay, go ahead, ma'am, then we'll get to you.
Okay. Hi, Nancy Goldstein, Seal Beach. To me, that seems like what an insurance commissioner ought to be doing. And I just don't understand why. I know the LA Times had an editorial against it. All I got out of it was they felt it wasn't the right time. Do you understand? Can you shed light on why they would be against this?
I'm not on the editorial board, so I am not privy to their arguments, but I think one of the arguments that was raised was the question about how it would mesh with the health care, the Obamacare program here. And there were all the concerns that are also expressed in the opposition, that you put a lot of power in the hands of one official who is an elected official, but a government official nonetheless, on setting these particular rates. Now,
And
let's get
one government official.
one government official. If you could stand up, we'll get a microphone to you, sir.
Jeff from Silver Lake. Of course, they have nurses associations, and there's so many thousands of nurses, a very important role in our society, but you kind of have nurses on both sides of this. The idea that most nurses or the larger nursing groups would be for Prop 45, I was curious why you would think that's true, if indeed it is true.
That's a really good question. I'm not sure why. The California Nurses Association has endorsed it. They've been very closely associated with Consumer Watchdog and have supported them. They're more of a liberal organization.
They are,
I think
and they're
that
more
maybe
of a
is the reason.
unionized type of organization. They're more friendly to Democrats. The other, I can't remember the exact name, but the group that has opposed this initiative, I believe, is sort of a more conservative group. I don't want to connect this, but you can think about this. The Democratic Party has endorsed the initiative. The Republican Party has not.
Okay. Any more questions about 45? We seeing anything? Yes, there's somebody right here and then someone there.
Hi, Katie from La Crescenta. You mentioned that lawyers are also in favor of this, and of course that's what they're emphasizing in the commercials night and day. Lawyers are behind this. Why? What would that benefit them?
Well, I think it's the lawyers are behind 46.
46.
I don't think that the lawyers are.
No, I'm seeing 45 as well.
Well, I mean, we will get to 46.
That's not their major focus.
No, they've got another
45.
measure that's more.
But here's what I think. I mean, they're sort of thinking, beware the unintended consequences of reform. But they, too, are very strongly allied with the Democratic Party. And the demographics in the state right now indicate that the Republican Party is basically on life support. And I think that the lawyers are saying, they're going to be Democrats from here on out. So we can give contributions. We can have access.
Well, there is one reason. I just thought the lawyers, if the insurance commissioner issues a ruling, the lawyers can challenge it and get attorney's fees.
That's true.
So that's
very true.
And Consumer Watchdog has done that in the past and gotten attorney's fees. Now, they would say they've saved you tremendous amounts of money, and they can only get the attorney's
Sounds
fees.
like the Hollywood Bowl.
I'm waiting for the helicopters and the planes. They can only get attorney's fees if they win the lawsuit. So that's the reason why the argument is that some lawyers will benefit by challenging the approval of the rates by the insurance commissioner. But again, Consumer Watchdog would say, well, if we reduce the rates for everybody, save you lots of money, we should get some money for
If
it.
you want lawyers, we got a big lawyer issue coming up. So there was another question in the middle here. Can you raise your hand and make yourself?
My question was the same as hers.
Oh, okay. So we're all set. Anybody else right here? Okay, go ahead.
Hello, TJ Moss, LA. My question is, what, if you can walk us through, what's the process of when a commissioner rejects a high rate? I mean, what you said this affects 15% of the people. Where does the rest of that money go? I mean, if they're able to successfully negotiate something lower along an exchange or individual rate, the insurance companies kind of get theirs. So does that affect the rest of us who are perhaps covered otherwise? And you alluded to the fact that putting this in place for automotive and homeowners insurance saved the state a large sum of money, and is that again just for those individuals that saw their rates perhaps negotiated or forced lower, or is that does that spread?
Good
elsewhere?
point. For the auto and homeowners, it applied to all of us, 100% of us. But of course, certain insurance companies would go to the insurance commissioner and say, "Here's what we want to do," and he would say, or she would say no. And then other people would not be challenged, other rates would not be challenged. So that's what would happen, of course, is if he rejected the rates, the insurance company would have to have a lower rate. And the idea is that the insurance company will have to justify their rates. A lot of argument is the insurance companies are wasting an awful lot of money on skyboxes and whining and dining things and high salaries, and the insurance commissioner would put them to the test. That's the purpose of the proposition.
Because there's a certain percentage that has to go for medical care, and that the insurance commissioner, under these stricter regulations, would be more empowered to make them prove that that's how the money was being spent. Am I right on that?
And also, I don't know, to tell you the truth, but also explicitly excluded from the initiative are those large group employer insurance and governmental programs. That's why only, I think it's 16%, 15% of the insured and the insurance programs are included.
And the reason for that, of course, is that presumably large employers have lots of clout with the insurance companies.
You betcha.
And can negotiate much lower rates, whereas individually, we don't have clout.
But until the Obamacare thing stepped in, we would continually have stories about how people's rates were doubling and tripling if they were individuals. As to whether or not this interferes with the profit margin goes back to that question of
Right.
where the profit is coming from and what use it's being put to. But I will tell you, before Prop 103, there were lots of threats about insurance companies leaving the state. And I don't think any insurance company left California, the home of more cars than any place else in the United States. And they're still doing a land office business, at least judging by how much I pay them every month.
But I wonder what the fact that California apparently is one of the more successful states in implementing Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, what effect that might have on the debate over this initiative. I kind of agree with the LA Times that we should wait a bit and see how the Obamacare rollout finally rolls out.
Well, let me then disagree, because we should have, equal time.
No,
here.
you may not. You know what happens.
I'm not married to, it's okay.
Joan, where are you?
35 states have the insurance commissioners reviewing rates. California is not one of those 35 states. And in some of the states, the insurance commissioner has been very active and has really reduced a lot of the rates. So the consumer watchdog would say we should be going along with what the rest of the country is doing.
Any more questions on this one? Yes, there's a question here. Can you stand up, please?
Pasadena. I have a question. Who's funding the other side?
Yeah,
You mean the no?
Yes.
Well, the no side is funded by the insurance companies. The yes side is funded by Consumer Watchdog.
The nurses have put in $1
and-
The
million.
nurses
and
and
the
some
Cal-
attorneys.
California Nurses
And
Association.
some attorneys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, it's
It's peanuts.
really unequal.
And most of the money went to circulating the initiative. So.
Yeah. Any more on this one? Questions? Okay. Then we have our quiz question. Remember, raise your hand. We'll come to you. What office was Jerry Brown first elected to? I saw a hand go up here. Are you sure? Well, I'll leave it to you guys. Janice, were you correct? Okay.
I believe he was elected as an LA Community College District trustee.
Yes. LA Community College District.
Or junior college.
Or junior college. In 1969, he beat out 123 candidates for a position on the board.
The first election for the new board.
His first election, and you guys had mentioned what percentage of the vote he actually got out of 123 candidates.
Somewhere around 5%.
He won with 5% of the vote. This is sort of the Arnold Schwarzenegger of his time with 100%.
This is the power of name recognition.
Edmund G. Brown Jr.,
Jr.
because his father had been governor, half a dozen years before?
Yeah, he
His father
lost
actually-
to Ronald Reagan in
66.
1966.
So,
So 3
yeah.
years before
Even
he
more
left
recently
office.
than that. So
And
very
he'd
good
been
on
around
that one.
forever in various offices.
All right, so back to our propositions. We have proposition, 46, and we have a video from one of Bob Stern's students about that.
My name is Ryan Driscoll, and I'm a junior at Claremont McKenna College. Proposition 46 addresses 3 major topics with the goal of improving patient safety. If adopted, Proposition 46 would increase the cap on non-economic damages that patients may claim during medical malpractice suits. The cap, which was set in 1975, would increase from $250,000 to $1.1 million. Economic damages are not capped and would not be affected by this measure. Proposition 46 would also require doctors and medical providers to be randomly drug tested. Hospitals would be accountable for administering tests, and providers testing positive would immediately be suspended by the California State Medical Board pending further investigation. The third portion of this measure addresses Cures, the California Prescription Drug Monitoring Program database. While membership in Cures is currently low, Proposition 46 would require all medical providers to check the database before prescribing controlled substances beginning in 2016. The Legislative Analyst's Office predicts that state and local government costs from Proposition 46 will be tens of millions to hundreds of millions of dollars annually. This would account for less than 0.5% of the state's annual general fund budget.
And 'tis clear as day, as
Isn't it,
Shakespeare
though?
would say. So, here we have a measure, and I want to ask you guys first, because you cannot put on a ballot measure that tries to accomplish two different things at once. You could not, for example, have a ballot measure that has, be kind to animals, plus, oh, by the way, we're going to tax, high-heeled shoes.
That's the germaneness rule, the
right.
single issue.
So, is drug and alcohol testing of doctors as relevant as a medical negligence lawsuit?
I don't think
that
so.
all doctors are drunk and
I think so. I mean, I don't think that that's a single subject,
Okay.
my sense.
All right.
Well, I think,
2/3 of it might be patient safety, as Bob argues, but what about
Oh, wow. Throw down that marker.
the malpractice cap? I don't see that as
well,
being
of course, Sherry,
patient safety.
Sherry is not a lawyer.
Neither are most voters,
Yes.
Robert.
I am a lawyer.
God,
But I
don't you bring
still
out
think
the
you're-
hat pin, you guys? Come on.
I think the Supreme
And I
Court...
play one on TV.
The California Supreme Court in the past has been very generous in terms of allowing initiatives like this to cover a single subject. The subject that they're arguing is patient safety. Clearly, this is an issue. I'm not denying that. I wrote an initiative several years ago that dealt with campaign financing, conflicts of interest, and lobbying. It's called the Political Reform Act. It passed by 70%. It was challenged for single subject grounds, and the trial court threw it out for single subject grounds. The California Supreme Court ruled 6-1 that it covered political reform as a subject. I think the court probably would say this covers patient safety as a subject. I don't think we're going to have to worry about it, however, given all the money being spent against it, all the newspapers being against it, and the polls. So we probably will not see the Supreme Court ruling on this, because my guess is this is not going to pass.
Is it because it's such a hodgepodge? Because a lot of people think, yeah, great idea to test doctors for drugs and alcohol, and may not pay too much attention to the rest of it.
What do you mean?
Well, that's the reason why they put that in there, of course, was the drug testing. Yeah, I think that the reason it's, I did a book called Democracy by Initiative. We found that if you spend lots of money against an initiative, you have about a 90% chance of defeating it, because when people are confused and people aren't sure, they're going to vote no. And there's 10 times as much money being spent against this as for it. So it's very likely, because of that, that this will go down.
And, I just don't see, I think it's right. I think Bob's right in that in the communication, the media and the message and the money, the no side has it all over. I also would like to think that California voters have seen enough of these hooks, the bait and switch little things that go into initiatives every now and then, that they will figure it out. And I'm not at all sure that there are enough Californians who are motivated enough or concerned enough about the issue of malpractice caps. It's a very small segment of the population, rightly or wrongly.
But when the malpractice issue first
vote.
came around, I think it was in the 80s, doctors
Well, no,
were going out of business because their premiums were so high, and that's what they're talking about again
In
this time.
1975, which was when Micra first showed up on the California legislative radar screen, among other things, a group of doctors' wives went up to Sacramento and sat in on the governor's office, Governor Cherry Brown's office. a lot of doctors didn't leave. Later on in 1987, well, first of all, you have to understand, remember I said that beware the unintended consequences of reform? When that $250,000 cap was first suggested in the legislature, the author of the bill thought, well, you know, maybe we should raise it or even have an elevator for inflation. And it was the trial attorneys who said, no, let's go with the lowest possible ceiling. That'll never pass the Democratic-controlled legislature. And if it does, it's totally unfair, and the Supreme Court won't uphold it.
Well, guess what?
Guess what? That's why, still today, we have that $250,000 cap. If indeed that elevator had been placed in MICRA when it was first passed, guess what inflation would have led today's ceiling to be? $1.1 million.
The other interesting point is that the legislature this year said we have this initiative. It's going to be very contested. Let's see if we can work it out between the proponents and the opponents and pass the legislation so the public doesn't have to vote on it. And Darrell Steinberg called in all the parties, and the hospitals and the doctors said, we don't want to compromise. We're going to kill this initiative. And Steinberg said, let's just go with 500,000, 250 to 500. No, we're not going with anything. We're going to kill this initiative. So that's why you get to vote on it.
One more little historical nugget, which certainly brings up similar dynamics. In 1987, there was a little bit of loosening of attorney's fees, if you will. It was part of what was the infamous napkin deal, when the major lobbyists, the major issue was tort reform, but MICRA became a part of it. And they all sat down at the speaker's office in Frank Fat's, and there is a speaker's table in Frank Fat's. It's the first big circular table in the back.
It's a big bar
room
in Sacramento.
in Sacramento. It's where a lot of legislative wheeling and dealing used to take place. And they signed off on this compromise on a napkin in Frank Fat's. So there was a loosening of attorney fees, and there was a 5-year truce among the major interests concerned with MICRA. When those 5 years ended in 1992, all hell
By the way,
broke
if you go to
loose.
Frank Fat's restaurant, I think you can see the napkin there.
Do they have it framed?
I think they have it framed, yes.
There's a pretty clear funding divide, as you may have noticed here. The funding for this, mostly by attorneys, totals maybe $3 million. The funding against it by doctors and medical associations, about $54 million. So as it was in the beginning, so it shall be, pretty lopsided. Some questions about this one? I saw a hand go up. Can you stand up and we'll get a microphone to you? Stand up, please.
Here it comes.
Patty, South Pasadena, what is MICRA?
That is the medical insurance, Douglas, what's the rest of it? Medical
Cost-
Insurance Cost
something.
Regulation Act.
Yeah.
Good, that was very good.
Thank you.
That's, it's bureaucraties.
Over here?
Hi there, James Ball, West Los Angeles. I'm curious, I saw the third sort of tenet that we discussed of this measure was that it would require a system that everyone looked, or so the doctors prescribing looked at, that had to look at conflicting prescriptions. It seems like that would be actually, for our society, the best component of this outside of lawyering and
Oh, yeah, we should talk about that.
all those components, et cetera.
And that was the motivation behind this initiative, quite
Well,
frankly.
how come that can't stand alone? I mean, I understand that,
could have.
yes, that would require a little bit more money and maybe some on the citizens' behalf, but it seems like in the long run, that's the kind of thing where we decrease cost and providing for those people who are over-prescribed.
You're
So
being
could you
way
speak
too
to that?
rational.
As much as they can pack in, and as Bob said, with the hook or the sweetener of, well, you got to test your doctors for drug and alcohol competence or incompetence, and then they can throw a bunch of other stuff in because they think you won't notice it. The measure about the controlled substances is, let me see, requires healthcare practitioners to consult state prescription drug history databases before prescribing certain controlled substances. And this is why the general topic of patient care seemed to be stretched a great deal in this case. There were questions about privacy issues if you maintain such a database, but obviously there's a problem with prescription drugs that exceeds that of illegal drugs, and this is one mechanism that they came up with for trying to deal with
this was the initial impetus for this initiative. A father, I believe his name is Bob Pack, lost his 10-year-old son and his 7-year-old daughter in a car accident that was caused by a woman who, shall we say, had taken several controlled substances, prescription drives, and was driving impaired. His wife, also in the car, survived, but she lost the twins that she was carrying. And this guy quit his job and has spent most of his time up in Sacramento lobbying for exactly what you think ought to be done, and I agree with that. I think let's just do it, and it could have been done by legislation, but it wasn't. Well, and I think the part of what may have happened is what is always happens by and large if you want to get anything out of the legislative process or the initiative process. If you don't have the resources yourself in particular, you compromise, and that's what went into this initiative.
Another question? Over here.
Is this the kind of messy thing we might pass that will wind up in front of the courts and be thrown out then because of all the...
Well, I think the only thing where it could be thrown out is the initial thing that Sherry talked about, and that is, does it cover more than one subject? If it covers more than one subject, the whole thing is thrown out. I don't think the other three things would be challenged, and I don't see any...
You mean if they're separate?
No, let's assume the court says this is a single subject.
Oh, okay.
I don't think there are other provisions in there that would be challenged. But what would be challenged, I think, is the whole idea, will this database be available? Will it be ready to go in time for this? And so there'll be some question about that part of it, I think.
I don't think you would find any constitutional challenges as were levied, for example, in Prop 187.
Right.
So. And apparently Cures, the database, is supposed to be up and going in 2015. Who knows? But that's what the argument is.
Do we have another question here? Yes.
Marla Tauscher from Pasadena. I had a question about the imposition of extra costs on local governments from raising the cap on medical malpractice. That seems to me like something that could spend a lot of time challenged by local governments in front of the Commission on State Mandates and or challenged in court by local governments. So it sounds like kind of a messy thing that could...
Well, you're right that there will be additional costs for malpractice insurance, and local governments have to pay it for their hospitals. But if it's passed by an initiative, I don't see the challenge. It's passed by the people of California. It's different from the legislature passing it and not passing on, not giving local governments money. But I think an initiative doesn't have to appropriate the money.
Most of the successful challenges, as I remember, to California initiatives have been when the underlying premise is unconstitutional, like 187, or when Californians voted in the 60s and said, by God, yes, we should be able to discriminate against black people in housing. And that was on the face of it unconstitutional, went to the Supreme Court, and that was thrown out. But it's a good point, because local governments are self-insured that the costs are going to go up if there are malpractice consequences. If, for example, a forceps delivery at county goes wrong, and something happens to that child that will require care for the rest of his or her life, the county will be paying for that. And so that'll be a higher cost, and it will raise the ceiling on the non-medical related costs that are attendant to that problem. So
yeah, there's no question costs will go up. The question is how much, and the proponents would say not that much.
And that's what the statistics apparently show. But not that much for a poor family is not the same as not that much for a family that can afford the Cadillac of health insurance.
Well, this has nothing to do with that. This has to do with whether the hospital's paying the additional malpractice insurance costs. Right now, of course, the argument is that a poor family whose child is hurt by a doctor will not be able to get an attorney because they can't claim any economic damages. What this will do is allow somebody who has been hurt negligently by a doctor to get a lawyer to sue the doctor.
Here, Janice. Can you stand up, please?
Susan, Los Angeles. Do you know how much our malpractice costs compared to some states that would have a cap of around $1 million?
It's a good question. It's my understanding, and I may be wrong on this, is that the insurance rates, because we are at the lowest level here in California over any other state.
Of the cap.
Of the cap. We have the lowest cap in the country, as I understand it, or at least tied for it. The insurance rates are a little higher in other states which have higher caps, but not that much. Now, some providers say that they will go out of business if their malpractice insurance goes up, and probably
like clinics.
Some clinics who are really right at the edge might have problems with this.
Other questions on this one? Over here. Can you stand up, please?
Gary Lorden, Pasadena. I'd like to ask Bob, on behalf of the legal profession, Bob, could you speak to the issue why it seems to be so incredibly powerful to defeat a proposition by saying that lawyers are behind it because it'll make more money for them, when in fact they're getting a percentage of what the plaintiffs are going to get?
Well, lawyers are not well liked at all, and that's why it's a very powerful message. I mean, remember Shakespeare said, "Let's kill all the lawyers."
Yeah, first, let's kill all the lawyers.
Just to let you know, I am not a practicing lawyer.
So you can put him at the bottom of Shakespeare's list.
Well, the ad that you're referring to uses every hot button phrase and word out there. The trial lawyers are behind it. The trial lawyers, as Bob says, are not well thought of. They changed their name of their association, by the way, from the trial lawyers to Consumer Attorney Association.
Yeah. You don't like them until you need them. It's like the time when Oliver North went to the ACLU. You could hear him talking about the ACLU until he needed their representation. But that phrase "trial lawyers" is a very powerful one. It's been used in a lot of national campaigns.
It's a very negative
as
phrase.
well.
Ironically, the ACLU is against this proposition. Yeah, really interesting.
On what grounds?
I think it's because of the drug testing and privacy, the whole question of privacy.
But see, as you tease out the different issues, it's really about 3 different kinds of ballot measures, but they bundled it all together into one. So, any other questions on this one? Oh, over here, please. Stand up, would you?
My name is Todd from Hermosa Beach.
But wow, thank you for the drive.
Thank you.
Wow.
Happy to make it.
It started yesterday.
It seems to me that the imposition of caps on these type of lawsuits really results from a fear that the juries are not capable of controlling their own sort of fairness to give a plaintiff unlimited amount, whether it's $1 million, $2 million, whatever they feel is deserved by the plaintiff. Why is there a desire to cap that amount? You ostensibly have a jury of your peers that's supposed to be fair to decide how much that amount should be.
I would say, if I can jump in, a lot of it is about what you hear anecdotally. You hear about the old lady who spilled the McDonald's coffee in her lap and got, $20 million or something. What you never hear is this was third-degree burns requiring skin grafts and the cap didn't fit properly or whatever. So I think that there's a resistance to the idea that somebody would make a third of that $40 million just by taking that case to court, not understanding all that goes into it.
There's also the opposition of the medical community to breaking that cap. And it has been the medical community since 1992, when the truce disappeared, who have been really, really strong, and they're a very powerful interest group in Sacramento, in fighting against raising the caps, because doctors will have to pay more. The hospitals will have problems, as Bob outlined. So it's not only because the trial lawyers are not well thought of, it's because a stronger lobby in Sacramento has been winning. And if you look at the amount of money being spent by the yes side and the no side, it's very clear that the no side is more committed, has put a whole lot more into trying to bring the initiative down than the yes side has put into trying to pass it.
I'm really surprised that there's been so little money spent on the yes side, and it has to be because the yes side realizes that the no side has spent so much money.
It's going to spend a lot of
so
money.
much money that it's going to go down.
And it's not way up on the agenda of California voters. They're just, it's just not. And as we both have said, if you don't care, if you're confused, if you're undecided, you tend to vote no. Earlier studies, and I'd like to see a new one, indicate that the no side of an initiative campaign comes into that campaign with a built-in 20% no vote.
Wow. Any other questions on this measure? There's one more here in the middle, and then we'll move on.
Polly from Hollywood. How big is the problem of doctors practicing under the influence of drugs? Is this truly an issue? Because you haven't talked about that.
Well, there's a good question. It's going to be like voter fraud, isn't it?
Exactly.
Well, the claim is
You
that
got
there are thousands of doctors who are under the influence at some point or another, much higher than I actually thought would be. Apparently, they have such easy access to the drugs that a lot of doctors under pressure do take drugs.
It's still a minute percentage, but there is the access, and it's like saying,
I don't think it's a minute
as long as
percentage.
it isn't me who has been cared for badly by a physician under the influence, I don't care.
But it also raises the question, and you imply it, is whether or not this is the remedy for that problem.
One of the issues is whether or not fellow physicians are going to ring the bell, are going to go to the group that is in charge and say, this guy, he's always drunk, or he's always under the influence of something.
Yeah. I just want to make sure that the doctor's urine sample doesn't get mixed up with my urine sample.
But that is part of the debate over whether or not this can be effective.
Yeah.
Well, I think it could be effective, but the real question is the cost of this, and also the fact that there's so much opposition to it.
All right, so
And money
we have
against
a
it.
quiz question, our last quiz question for this. Now, you know that we have a peculiar system of choosing judges in California. The governor appoints judges, and then they have to run for re-election. So the question is, raise your hand if you know the answer. Let's try not to get repeat winners in here. How long is the term of a California Supreme Court justice? Raise your hand.
Somebody over there.
Isn't it 12 years?
12 years is the answer. I already asked it. Yeah.
And they undergo a retention election.
No, I have one more. They undergo
a retention election.
And that's why
the
you
Supreme
had
Court justice. That's
you had
right.
elections like the Rose Bird election, who was controversial because she did not approve death sentences.
And you realize U.S. Supreme Court justices
don't have to stay
until they die or retire.
Or maybe even longer.
I went to the... Sherry, are you talking about heartbeat tests for justices? Is that fair? I actually went to the swearing in, the enrobing of a new federal judge, Andre Barat, who was the U.S. attorney who just became a federal judge. It's a lifetime appointment unless you commit high crimes or misdemeanors. And I think in my memory there was only one, Alcee Hastings in Florida, who was kicked out for high crimes and misdemeanors as a judge, and people in his district promptly elected him to Congress, which is probably where he's better suited.
I think is probably appropriate.
There you go. We do have one more quiz question, so we'll do that after the next ballot issue, which is Proposition 47, Criminal Sentencing Misdemeanor Penalties Initiative Statute. The backdrop of this is the controversy over 3 strikes. The 3 strikes was too rigid, that it locked in judges and filled up the prisons in a way perhaps we should have had more flexibility to do. We've also recently had from the governor's office realignment, where you see prisoners shifted from the state level into local jails. This would do rather the same thing and deal with sentencing aspects of different kinds of offenses. So why don't the two of you take it away?
Well, go ahead.
Well, I've been surprised.
Let the attorney start.
I've been surprised at the support for this. It's supported by the San Francisco District Attorney, and also supported by the League of Women Voters, which really surprised me. And the top funder to this is the American Civil Liberties Union, which also surprised me. The idea, of course, of this is to reduce the cost of prison, is to release nonviolent felons who were convicted for drug possession or for petty crimes. Now, the District Attorney Association is against this, saying it'll release too many felons and will increase crime. There's been a lot of money spent for it. I haven't seen any money spent against it.
Almost $5 million for it and none against it.
And no media that I've seen at all.
The curious thing is, it's always easy to get the legislature to vote in favor of tougher crime laws, but none of them wants to go on the record as reducing sentences, because God forbid, you should get another Willie Horton.
Exactly.
The other interesting part about this, and I had a question last week at the forum at Claremont McKenna, was where does the money go that we're going to be saving on this? And this proposition engages in ballot box budgeting.
Yep.
It says it doesn't go to the general fund. And a woman raised her hand. She said, that's good because I don't want the legislature dealing with this. What it does, it goes to funds for programs to reduce truancy, for victims of crime, for substance abuse and mental health treatment. So the money that's saved, and they're estimating $200 million a year, will go to specific programs set forth in the initiative, which I think is kind of too bad in a sense. I don't like ballot box budgeting, but I understand in terms of passing it, most people would prefer it rather than going to general fund.
You just have to answer the question, where does the money go? And you have to do it specifically. Voters never more, I think, will give the legislature a blank check for anything. But they're more amenable to allowing money to be spent if they know where the money is going to go and they agree with where the money is going to go.
Well, you have some examples like the big tobacco settlement, that was given to each of the states, billions of dollars to California that was supposed to go for tobacco education programs, and which went to things like curb cuts on streets so people in wheelchairs who were put there by tobacco, presumably, could get across the street. But not all of it did. Some cities used it for things that had nothing to do with that. And so I think this addresses concerns like that, whether it addresses them appropriately or adequately.
Or enough, yeah.
But again, why is this an initiative? Pat was exactly right. Because the legislature is afraid to vote for reducing penalties.
They never will.
They won't do it. And that's why we have the initiative process, is so we can go around the legislature and say, we're a little bit braver. We have a little bit more guts than you guys do.
And this happened with 3 strikes because Steve Cooley, who was the DA in Los Angeles County, I talked to him a lot about this. He didn't like 3 strikes because it locked in judges, it was hard on prosecutors, and it filled up the courts because everybody facing a felony, a 3rd strike, now said, hell no, I want a jury trial. I'm going to roll the dice. And so things that they might have pleaded down to lesser cases, the DAs weren't pleading anymore. And they said, I'm going to go to a jury and take a chance and see if I can get off on this 3rd strike. And it filled up the courts. The courts even now are feeling the effects of that with backlogs and budget cuts. And so one of the things this addresses is putting some money back into the court system to remedy that.
There's another aspect of this, too. Do you remember the case of, I guess, a young man who had 2 serious felonies and stole a piece of pizza?
From a kid out on the Santa Monica Pier.
Right. And there was discretion there, and he was put away because it was his 3rd strike. What this does is basically eliminate what is called the wobbler crime. That can be either a misdemeanor or a felony, and defines categories. Whether or not you agree with those categories is another question. But in this case, that guy probably wouldn't have had his 3rd strike because of the definition of what constitutes a misdemeanor in this initiative.
Remember, we're talking about misdemeanors versus felonies. Felonies, you go to state prison. Misdemeanors, you go to county jail. Just because you have committed some of these crimes doesn't mean you're going to get off scot-free.
Right. A misdemeanor is a sentence of a year or less.
Yeah, you'll go to county jail as opposed to the state prison, but you will.
For 25 to life.
But you will go to jail.
And the overcrowding question is one that would be addressed in here. You've read recently that there are federal orders about ending the overcrowding in state prisons. This measure might go some way toward resolving that. The concern at every level is, does it put criminals back out on the street? The supporters of this are going a long way to try to reassure people that that's not going to be the case.
I'm going to be watching this one because I'm not sure this is going to pass, even though there's no opposition against it. So this is the one proposition I will be watching election night.
Any questions about this one? Over here, please. We have 2 questions. Who are you again, please?
I'm Claire from Altadena, and I have a little experience with being the victim of misdemeanors, so I have kind of a jaundiced eye about this. As a matter of fact, one time a $35 bicycle, I mean nothing to me now, but at the time it was my means of transportation to where I was doing my job search, was stolen from me, and sure enough, the guy was on his 3rd strike, and he rolled the die, and I showed up, for a $35 bicycle, and the guy went to jail. And
jail or prison?
Or prison.
I don't know, one way or the other. That was his 3rd strike, and he took a bet, and I showed up for $35. And more recently, I had my $500 cell phone stolen. I'm really pissed about this. So what I really want to know is, I don't want more people in jail. What I want is fewer people stealing things. And I don't know if these long-term solutions like preventing dropouts, I see the cause and effect there. Yes, that has kind of an effect. But if these really scratch the itch of, we have people out there victimizing us all the freaking time,
This goes a lot to policing philosophy.
Yes.
Some cities would, be all over a $500 cell phone theft, and other cities like Los Angeles might, you might not even be able to get a cop to come out and talk to you about it. And this goes to policing rather than courts and sentencing in a lot of ways. And that kind of quality of life, broken windows policing is part of the philosophy of LA, but they say they don't have enough cops to enforce that sort of thing. And if they did, then you might see this kind of crime being taken more seriously. But at every level, there's a choke point about whether this sort of crime gets taken seriously, whether it's the police level, the district attorney's office, the city attorney's office, who decides on where to take this, all the way up to the prisons, and whether there's even room for a guy like this in county jail, and he gets spun around and turned out again in 3 days.
The interesting on this proposition, I think that the main purpose of this was to reduce the penalties for drug possession. And they threw these other things in, I think, as sort of a sweetener or to divert your attention to that. So, but I think the main reason on this is to reduce it for drug possession. And they will say it will save several $100 million.
Any more questions on this one? No? Oh, yes, do we have one? Yes, one over here, Janice, against that wall, and then one here.
Hi, my name is Damian Esteen. I live in South Central Los Angeles, and I'm gonna go home there tonight. And my look on this is totally different. And where I live is, no offense, but losing a cell phone, stolen bike, we don't report to police. That's something you deal with your neighbors. And for me, is what the gentleman said here, is like, my main concern is people who were locked up in the 1980s, 1990s, they're coming home right now. And when these people come home, the neighborhood has changed. They are now homeless. They don't have the family that they lived with when they went to prison. They're no longer there. And the 3 strikes law is totally different, where I'm like, wow, this dude got struck out. He's coming home. Where does he go? And for me, it's kind of like, when I look at the youth of my neighborhood, it's like, okay, these little kids, if they happen to stolen it's like an abstract thought, but the gentleman with the pizza is like, this kid does something, I don't know where this kid is gonna go. And I mean, my concern is like, for my group, it's a bigger thing. It's not so abstract, and it's closer, So I want to know, what is the thoughts on that?
No, and this addresses a fairly small piece of the entire sentencing process. The Governor Schwarzenegger, changed the name to California Departments of
Corrections and
Correction
rehabilitation.
and rehabilitation. But there's been not much in the way of rehabilitation. Classes that used to educate people for when they left school to be accountants or auto mechanics, those have all seriously been cut back. And you also have a lot of employers, including government, that may not employ convicted felons, however clean their, out of prison record may be. So at every juncture, the system is tipping over against exactly the kind of process you're talking about. People coming out with a skill, people coming out with family connections, people coming out with a stake in the outside world.
Interestingly, if you look at the initiative, both of you have been making a case for the passage of the initiative, because if it's truthful about what it does deal with dropout prevention, with school truancy, mental health, substance abuse, and victim services. And if you've been watching the media, particularly for Kamala Harris, the Attorney General, her major argument is, if we want to reduce crime, we have to start with children while they're in school. I just bring that up because I think it's very interesting.
There's one more question over here.
Todd from Hermosa Beach. By the way, there's a movie I just saw called Imperial Dreams that is all about anti-recidivism and how we can deal with that in LA. But my question is, with regards to the fiscal impact of this proposition or initiative, have they taken into consideration how it will alter the balance of the payments, whether it's coming from the state or from the county, and how this shift in the balance of prisoner population will affect those respective coalitions, I guess, or groups?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think the county costs will go up because there'll be more misdemeanors. Sure. The state costs will go down. And that's, of course, what Jerry Brown has been trying to do, because our state prisons are way overcrowded, and federal courts have said to Jerry Brown, you must reduce the prison population. And what he's been doing is sending the prisoners to jails. And so, yes, county costs will go up on this. However, they're saying overall, the state's going to save several $100 million, and the counties will save money. But I think in terms of state versus county, the county will have more of an increase in costs.
And as soon as the realignment question came up last year, the counties began squalling because they saw quite rightly that they would have more people in their custody and to take care of, and it would be off the state books but onto the county books. And where the money would come from, they were supposed to bring the money, each prisoner bring back a percentage of the money he was costing the state. Didn't happen that way. So, anything else on this one? Oh, over here?
Hi, I'm Jack from Pasadena. In the beginning, this was sort of framed as relevant to three strikes. I'm a little confused about that because didn't Proposition 36 pass in 2012, which defined that, I think, basically the third strike, you can't have a nonviolent offense as your third strike. So I'm a little confused about the interaction between this proposition and three strikes.
Well, I think what this proposition does is make the categories more specific. I think it cleans up the language a little bit. I think that it is trying to give guidelines to judges, to prosecutors, and give them less wiggle room in terms of sentencing for specific crimes. What I found very interesting is that in this initiative, it specifically spells out that you are still under three strikes if you happen to be a child molester, if you happen to have a record of significantly violent crimes. I never read the text of 36, but I do believe that what this will do is firm up the language of what it means to be convicted under third strikes, what it means to not be convicted for that third strike, if that third strike is stealing, for example, a piece of pizza.
All right, anything else on this one? We have one, all right, we have one more gift bag for one more quiz question. All right, raise your hand if you know the answer. Who can explain why Jerry Brown served 12 years as governor and may serve 16 if he's reelected, even though we have term limits on governor's terms in California. Raise your hand if you know why. Try not to get repeat customers.
Oh.
Janice, have you won before? No. All right, let's stand up and get a microphone to you.
Because they have to be consecutive terms, and he wasn't doing it consecutively more than twice.
Nope.
That's
Nope. Nope.
okay. Next.
Well, the term limits was passed after he had completed the other terms.
That's exactly
That's
right.
it. So he was sort of grandfathered in, I guess we can say. Do you
Well,
wanna say
it was
that about
anybody
Jerry?
who was elected after 1990, which was when Proposition 130
Well, he was elected
passed.
before 19.
That's right. That's right. So it didn't even apply to him.
But there was a
Anybody.
president who served 2 non-consecutive terms. Chester Arthur?
No. Grover Cleveland.
Well, Grover Cleveland. But that was also way before term limits.
I want to get a gift bag. I want to get a gift bag.
We've given you gift bags over the years. And of
I
course,
never got one.
They passed that constitutional amendment because of Franklin Roosevelt, and then they wanted Ronald Reagan to be able to run for
they
more than
wanted
2
to-
terms, and it came around and bit him on the ass. So, okay, so our last
Beware
measure.
the unintended consequences of reform.
As always, Proposition 48, Indian gaming, which would allow a particular tribe with which Jerry Brown had made a compact some years ago, the North Fork Rancheria of Mono Indians, set up a casino that is away from their ancestral tribal lands, because in the past they have all been on tribal lands. And by the way, California had more Native American tribes than any other state in the Union, more Native American languages than any other state in the Union, but because some of the old legislation from Congress in the 19th century covered only those tribes that were acknowledged as tribes that had been discovered, say, up to the Rocky Mountains, California Indians sort of got the short end of the stick, the even shorter end of an already short stick. So maybe this is one way they're trying to remedy it. Let's hear about this measure.
Well, this is a referendum, not an initiative. Now, what is a referendum? The legislature passed a bill last year, 2013, and another Indian tribe was very upset and said, you shouldn't have passed the bill. We're going to circulate a ballot measure to stop this from going into effect. So a referendum stops legislation passed by the legislature from going into effect. Fascinating to me is we have 109 tribes in California. We have 59 casinos in California that gross $7 billion a year. This compact would add 2,000 slot machines to that mix. What's happening is one tribe is saying, we don't want competition from this other tribe, and so we're going to spend money stopping this compact, and they've spent $18 million to try to stop this. And the tribe that pushed it through the legislature hasn't spent any money, or very little money, in support of it. So it's very likely that people will vote no on this because you're only seeing the no ads. The other part of this was there's another tribe called the Wiyot tribe that also is part of the compact, and they agreed not to build a casino in exchange for getting some of the money from the tribe that is building the casino. Finally, it comes down to the tribe that wants to build the casino is not building on their land because their land is up in Yosemite and is environmentally
That's
impacted.
not exactly true, because apparently when the feds, after it's okayed by the state, the feds have oversight of it, and they ruled that when they purchased that land then became tribal land.
Well, yeah, the point is they purchased land to put the casino on close to this other tribe. And the argument against it is, well, that means that other tribes can purchase land throughout the state, maybe on Ventura Boulevard, maybe across the street from here, and build casinos in
Wouldn't that be fun?
areas.
But this is a pact that was already made with the governor and this tribe.
Yeah.
What you're talking about would remain to be negotiated. So this is like completing the deal. That's how
The important
proponents
thing to
argue.
remember is this is one compact, and it was a compact that was agreed to by the tribe involved, by the governor, the legislature, and the feds. If another tribe decides we're going to do the same thing, it may work or it may not work.
I was fascinated that this bill barely passed the legislature. Republicans and Democrats supported it. Republicans and Democrats opposed it. It got the bare minimum number of votes in passing in the legislature. And Jerry Brown supported it. Fascinating also, Jerry Brown is saying vote yes on this. Senator Dianne Feinstein, an ally of Jerry Brown, is saying vote no on
But
this.
she's been opposing the casinos all along, I think.
Well,
Yes,
yeah.
she has.
Been called him. And so who's for this besides Jerry Brown and the tribe?
That's it.
That's it.
I mean,
And
this is just
Jerry, of course, loves the slots, man. You can just see him there every Friday night.
And there's more than one tribe against it. Oh, I'm sorry. Also, Station Casinos, which is not a tribe, but has a lot of casinos in Las Vegas, has, excuse me, has an agreement to help get whatever casino is built up and running. And so they are also supporting vote yes.
As I understand, they also helped buy the land for the tribe.
Yeah.
So
They were an
so this is
investor.
basically an argument between two tribes. Why do we have to vote on this? I suppose if you care about gambling, if you're anti-gambling and don't want any more casinos,
right.
then you do care about it. Other than that, most of us aren't going to really care one way or the other.
Any questions about this one? Yes, can you stand up, please?
My name's John, and I'm from Fullerton. My question about this is whether you think that approving this will bring about a kind of slippery slope where the tribes will buy property in places that maybe people wouldn't want a casino to be, claim then that they're their property, and then create the casino. What is there that would stand in the way of that slippery slope coming true?
Well, the slippery slope has already occurred. As far as I'm concerned, we have 59 casinos throughout California. So we're already there. Remember, any tribe that wants to buy land or build a casino has to get approval from Jerry Brown, the legislature, and the federal government. So there's a big process they have to go through. It just isn't automatic. Assuming Jerry Brown gets elected, by the way. I mean,
Well, the governor, whomever
yes,
he or
the
she may
government,
be.
Yes, exactly.
So, another question? Yes, over here. And then I thought I saw someone in the back as well.
Jeff from Los Angeles. It's that Prop 49 was taken off the ballot. You guys are so knowledgeable, I figured you would know that story. It's mentioned in the voter guide.
Yeah.
The phantom proposition.
I am very upset about that. Actually, I am. First of all, I like more propositions, but secondly, this dealt with campaign financing, a specialty that I had, urging the Congress and the legislature to pass a constitutional amendment overturning Citizens United and other Supreme Court decisions. That proposition, had it been on the ballot, would have gotten 70% yes vote. The California Supreme Court threw it off the ballot, said it's just advisory. It's not, it would not enact any legislation, and thus we should not be voting on it. I think the court was wrong.
Another go at it, maybe in another election?
No, well.
I can't imagine, can you?
I don't think so.
The only thing that I don't know, someone, maybe Bob, could put forth an initiative that on state level would abrogate or prevent the kind of changes that we have seen occurring in the campaign financing.
It's a federal constitutional question. California, just to give you a little background in terms of Citizens United, California really is not affected by Citizens United because we don't ban corporations and labor unions from making campaign contributions, so it really didn't affect us. But in terms of sort of philosophically, in terms of where the court is going, in terms of what we had in the past, what we're seeing is courts really throwing out a lot of campaign finance legislation. The legislation I wrote back in 1974, which passed by 70% of California voters, part of it was thrown out by the court because we did limit how much you could spend on circulating a ballot measure. We did limit how much you could spend on supporting a ballot measure or opposing a ballot measure. And the Supreme Court in 1976, on another case, ruled that you could not limit expenditures. They dealt with the federal law, and so our law was declared unconstitutional. But we did try back in 1974.
When the court took Citizens United and issued its decision, they were also very laudatory about transparency and disclosure, but the way the court works, they can't affirmatively create a policy, which, as I found out by talking to Daniel Newman at MapLight, that it's either up to the Federal Election Commission to start enforcing the rules that are there and demanding transparency, which there is not now. You can give unlimited amounts and not have to disclose, or it's up to Congress, and it's not necessarily in Congress' interest to require disclosure. And the FEC by law is turned into a toothless agency because you've got 6 Republicans, 6 Democrats. At least 3 of the people there are serving expired terms because the new appointees have to be approved by the Senate, and what are the odds of that? So even the laws that are on the books can't be enforced. So the prospect of having tougher laws about disclosure and transparency are not very likely at the federal level, although at the state, they are more possible.
Yeah, the California Fair Political Practices Commission has been very aggressive in pursuing this and brought some lawsuits a couple of years ago dealing with Jerry Brown's initiative. So at the state level, we're doing okay. At the federal level, Pat is exactly right. The Federal Election Commission, unfortunately, is a toothless tiger.
Bob, how does the concept of dark money relate to California?
Well, it relates in the sense of trying to hide the disclosure of who is actually funding. In California, dark money is lighter than in most other jurisdictions and clearly is much better than at the federal level. So the problem is tracing through all these committees, tracing through the contributions and ultimately finding out. Unfortunately, in many cases, we won't find out until after the election.
Which happened on Prop 32, right?
Prop
last
30
time
and
around?
Prop 32. We won't find out
Right.
until after the election. The FPPC did impose $1 million fine on the group that did that. And so I think in California, we won't see groups engaged in as many dark money activities as at the federal level because the Federal Election Commission is not enforcing the law, is not going after it at the federal level. But fortunately, here in California, we are.
And $1 million for these guys, it falls out of their pants when they change their clothes in the golf course locker room. You know, it's nothing to some of these guys.
No, I don't agree with that. I don't agree
No?
with that. Nope.
$1 million here, $1 million there, the F. Dirksen line?
We're seeing much more disclosure in California because they realize the FPPC will go after them.
Oh, in California,
In
yes.
California.
But and what we mean by in California, even federal elections like Congress in California, even though they're California Congress members, are governed by the federal election rules, which are the Citizens United
And just to
rules.
plug, read Pat's op-ed this morning, the interview with Dan Newman, it appeared in this morning's
This is why I
Times.
know anything about this, because I just talked to the guy.
And it's a really good interview, so
All right.
go online.
Well, I hope you all intend to vote. You are here, so I'm presuming that's the case. So go out and spread the gospel among your friends and family and make sure they do the same. And take that part of citizenship, which unlike Australia, we are not penalized for not doing. You can be fined in Australia for not voting. Here, you just have a guilty conscience, or so we hope. So I want to thank our guests. Please thank both of them.
Thank you.
And the Crawford Family Forum team, John Cohn, Janice Wachi-Hurst, Dave McKeever, Liz Brown, Haley Waters, and Gabriel Bernadette Shapiro. The alcoholic beverages made available courtesy of Sun Series Bar and Beverage Catering. Thank you, and go vote.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. I'm trying to keep it brisk.